Okay, nobody asked and nobody cares, but last video I said that I was rewatching Teen Wolf and I'm in my early 20s and I watched it when I was a teenager and I loved it a lot, and like I've just started watching it again now and it's great. I watched the first episode and I watched like 5 minutes, if that, into the second episode, stopped watching it and then proceeded to just not watch it for the entirety of the whole week, and the interest in watching it's completely gone. However, I have actually piqued my interest in another show that I binge watched like the first season in a week a year ago when I was doing my masters, and then just proceeded not to finish it because I think the episodes got a bit samey. It was like a really big lead up to like this really big villain, this really big like big bad thing, and then it would take like 10 seconds for them to solve it, and I would be a bit like, oh, is that it? Anyways, it's called Sleepy Hollow and it's really good. I'm downplaying it and I'm making it sound really bad, but it's actually really good. I just needed some time away from it. Apparently I needed a year away from it. Not halfway through, but I was like 6-7 episodes into season 2. And I was like halfway through an episode as well. I don't know why I just stopped watching midway through an episode. I think I had to leave to go to a lecture and then I just never finished. So yeah, it had been so long that I needed to restart the episode because I had no context to what was going on. I absolutely am back now, loving it. Ichabod is one of my favourite fictional characters of all time, and Abby too. Like their friendship, you have no idea what I'm going on about if you haven't watched the show, but their friendship is just everything. She is so slay and powerful and strong and like a strong woman and gorgeous. He is such a gentleman. And he's so funny, and like, not to spoil it, but like him coming from like colonial times into like the 21st century, it's so funny watching him be in this time, and he's just such a gentleman. Anyway, so yeah, that Sleepy Hollow is now my weekend show. It used to be X-Files. I love X-Files. It's one of my favourite shows. But I've watched it now in its entirety, only 2 times, and I watched odd episodes on and off, especially episodes that I really love, especially season 1. Season 1 of X-Files is a vibe, and I love, like, the werewolf episode. But yeah, I was like, okay, I need a new weekend show. I must not be the only one who has a show that they only watch on the weekend, because it's like, I don't know, I feel like it signals to my brain that, like, it's the weekend, we can calm and chill and watch our weekend show. Used to be X-Files, love that show, is my favourite show. And maybe I'll alternate between the two. Maybe I'll go for a Sleepy Hollow and then I'll go for an X-Files episode. However, why I bring this up is because I feel like it's a great segue into what I want to talk about today and how I came across the idea. Basically, there was this episode of X-Files that I watched a few weeks back now. It's been a while. And this wasn't the first time I watched the episode. Obviously, like I said, I've watched X-Files all the way through twice now, maybe more. And it isn't my first time watching the episode. But for some reason, this time, watching the episode, it really stuck with me. And it was really on my mind for a while, and I didn't know why. And I thought it was just because I felt a bit sorry for the main character and what happened to him. But I kept like replaying the themes and I was like, what does this mean? Like, it's obvious, the meaning is obvious of the episode, but I was like, but why do I keep thinking about it? Like, it never used to be a standout episode to me. It's not really one of my favourites. Like, it's not like a vibey one for me. By the way, if you're not familiar with the X-Files, and this means nothing to you, basically it's a show from the 90s that is about 2 FBI agents, Dana Scully, Fox Mulder. They are assigned the X-Files, which are basically like a bunch of really strange, seemingly scientifically impossible cases that may have supernatural or like paranormal aspects to them. So they're assigned these cases, and it honestly makes me laugh because on Disney Plus it's described as a buddy cop drama, which is hilariously misleading because yes, technically they do investigate crime, and yes, technically there is drama, but it also is like, apart from being a horror and sci-fi, each episode is also just masterfully crafted, in my opinion. This is my favourite show, so I am up its arse a little, but I love it so much. Like, it just always has cool interpretations and critiques on like society and stuff. And yeah, each episode of X-Files is just so X-Files. Like, it can be funny and light-hearted episode where it just doesn't take itself seriously, it breaks the fourth wall, it's so silly, and yet you take it seriously because like it's art, because it's just so well written and made. And then you also get episodes that are just so deep and make you question your beliefs and really make you feel for the characters, and you get so like invested. And then you get episodes that are just so crazy and weird, but you're into that. And then you just get episodes that are so scary and creepy and unnerving. And I don't know, I just love the mix of that. And as a girl who is a really big baby, but also does very much appreciate the horror genre and wishes she wasn't such a big baby so she could watch more horror, I really do love the X-Files for just allowing me into that world and still letting me have like the barriers and the safety of knowing that like my comfort characters are gonna be okay, even if really terrible things do still happen to them. That being said, X-Files does deal with some really heavy stuff and things that might upset certain people. I am going to be talking about certain things in this episode. I'm going to keep it general and not go into detail because I want it to be somewhat lighthearted and not that heavy and deep. But I will be mentioning stuff like addiction or like mental health, coping mechanisms, stuff like that. I won't be going into detail. I won't be naming anything in particular, so don't worry. I'm just going to speak in a broad sense. But if those things still do upset you and trigger you, then maybe don't listen to this. Also, I will be talking about a certain episode, therefore I am going to be spoiling the whole episode for you. So if you wanna watch the episode first and then come back to this, then you can. The episode I'm going to be talking about is season 7, episode 3. It's called Hungry. Also, another trigger warning. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but like I said, this is like a horror weird show, so I am going to be mentioning like some gore, even though it's not that gory, but you know, just giving you a warning. So this episode is about a guy, Rob. We love Rob. He works in a fast food restaurant and he seems pretty normal, seems pretty sweet, seems pretty nice. Rob, however, has an issue. He has a bit of a problem, and that problem is he eats brains. He seemingly needs to, from what I can remember. He has this long tongue that kind of makes an incision and then he just sucks the brain out. So it doesn't really leave any marks or anything. And Mulder and Scully are obviously called out to the scene because these bodies are turning up without brains. There's no really obvious way of how the perpetrator is taking these brains without leaving any obvious hole in the head, I guess. So yeah, very weird, very strange. The crazy kids get called out to work on this case. What I love about this episode as well is, to me at least, like, this is the suspect, this is the perpetrator, and we know he's guilty, we know he's done it, but he also just seems like a nice normal guy who's really struggling with this thing that he doesn't want, because he doesn't want to hurt people. Like, we see this throughout the episode, he doesn't want to hurt people, he doesn't want to keep doing this, he has a real hard time battling with himself, and he really just tries to help himself and stop doing it. Normally in these episodes there's a very clear villain and they are portrayed as evil. The threat is bad. There's not really any morality or humanity in them. They don't really care about who they're hurting. There's kind of a similar monster, I guess, quote monster, in the earlier seasons in an episode that kind of explores the dangers of online dating and meeting up with a stranger and stuff like that. Obviously in the 90s that was like a very new concept, and so the X-Files explored a lot of fears, but especially fears to do with like new technology and stuff. So yeah, there was an episode where a monster that looked human kind of searched for his victims on online chat rooms and dating sites, and he would purposely lure out his victims, and he seemingly needed a certain thing from them to survive. But unlike Rob, we see no remorse from this man. He doesn't really try to change or get help. He doesn't show any guilt. He purposely picks his victims to suit a certain criteria. Whereas Rob doesn't really lure anyone. He doesn't really actively pick out his victims, and he actually tries to get help and change. He watches self-help tapes. He tries to go to therapy. He even goes to a support group. And when he does harm others, it's kind of like this desperate measure and this spur of the moment kind of thing. It's not really portrayed as premeditated, it just sort of happens where the person is in the wrong place at the wrong time, i.e. near Rob when his craving flares up, his craving for brain. That honestly sounds like a euphemism. Anyway, actual brain, not like the word that they use on TikTok to replace another word. Actual brains. Okay? I feel like Miranda, don't. Anyways, at both times, because like I said, watch this episode twice. Both times watching this, I can remember feeling really bad and really sorry for Rob and his ultimate ending in this episode. Again, spoiler. But it really struck me that he was genuinely trying to get help for himself and he just couldn't. And he wasn't inherently evil or wanting to do harm like the usual villain or monster of this type of episode. And it also just struck me as well. Like, I kept thinking, like, how hard it must be having to hide your true self and struggle by yourself because you can't fully get the support that you need because, again, this is a massive spoiler, but we see that he's not entirely human. There are multiple scenes where we see him. This honestly, the first time I saw it, it shook me to the core. So he takes off his wig. You don't know that he wears a wig until he takes it off, and then you're like, oh, okay, like, cool. And then he takes off his ears, and you're like, oh, he doesn't have any ears, okay, cool. And then he takes off his contact lenses to reveal black eyes, and you're like, oh, cool. And then he takes off his teeth to reveal like tiny sharp ones, and you're like, oh, okay. So yeah, we're supposed to have this reaction of surprise or maybe even disgust. We're supposed to have this understanding or assuming that he's not human, or at least he doesn't have the same makeup as us, as we do. And again, both times watching this episode, I took this transformation as Rob's true form. But I also took it very literal. And I think obviously X-Files, like the monsters are real, the monsters do look like that, but also I would say that X-Files is brilliant at commentary on society, the way we treat others, but also the way we treat ourselves. I didn't actually clock that the episode is mostly, if not entirely, in Rob's point of view. And so I read a post on Reddit that pointed it out. Again, the reason I was on Reddit was because, yeah, the episode was on my mind and I googled it. I was like, what is the meaning of this episode? Because it must be something deeper. Like, why do I keep thinking about this? And I found myself on a Reddit post. I clocked that it was in Rob's point of view. And I knew that it was obviously, this whole episode is basically like a metaphor for like addiction and cravings and stuff like that. But I didn't actually realise how deep it went, at least for me, and what it meant to me until I realised that this episode is in Rob's point of view. Maybe this is all very obvious and everyone's like, yeah, duh. But I guess it must have gone over my head, so I will go on. Because I think as well a lot of things mean something different, or we connect to certain things we hadn't connected to in the past because we learn, we grow. We're obviously always changing and being able to deal with, I guess, for lack of a better word, deal with different things at different times in our lives. And now I would say I'm becoming more healed, and I would say more present. I'm being honest with myself, but I'm also becoming more understanding and more gentle and forgiving towards myself. So I feel like it's easier for me to relate in a way to Rob's character and give him the benefit of the doubt or feel empathy or sympathy for him, because I can see a little bit of myself in him and I'm being very gentle with myself as well. Coming back to it being Rob's point of view, I really love the concept of we're only seeing him through his eyes. We're not seeing what other people will see. We're seeing almost what he thinks of himself, and I think that's a great metaphor, at least for me, of how we can see ourselves as monsters or inhuman in some way when we go through certain things. Like when I've struggled with mental health and trying to cope with that through different coping mechanisms, I really beat myself up and I've really struggled to feel normal or worthy of being seen and accepted. I have felt so embarrassed of myself. So in a way you kind of do feel like this hideous monster, or at least, you know, it's this part of yourself that feels hideous. So you need to hide it away and you do all these things to appear quote normal, like Rob did with, you know, his wig and his contacts and everything. I also think the taking off of these things, that Rob did, like revealing this side of himself that he does carry a lot of shame and guilt from, can also represent how scary it can be when you're trying to be vulnerable and honest with others, but also just yourself as well, like really being with yourself and accepting this part of yourself. Also not accepting that this is only you, but acknowledging that yes, I did these things, or yes, I'm struggling with this thing, and in a way that is not beating yourself up or believing that you're a bad person or believing that you're a monster for it. And that can be so difficult, especially when society and the people around you have a certain narrative around this subject, or has a certain reaction to people going through what you're going through. I know when I've been struggling in the past with certain things and I was vulnerable, or I felt vulnerable when I was like seeking help and it didn't really have the outcome that I needed and I didn't get the support that I needed, it did make me feel very ashamed and embarrassed and guilty, but it also just made it 10 times harder for me to be by myself and be honest with myself, but still in a loving way. When we look at ourselves through those negative experiences, we really do kind of start to believe them and believe that we deserve those negative experiences. I think another thing that stood out to me as well, and again, this is maybe me reading way too deep into things, but we're already quite deep, so let's just keep digging, is that he does try to change, and he does, for the most part, seem like a nice, normal guy who does invoke a sense of empathy and sympathy, but there are moments, and it's mostly when he kind of gives in to his cravings after working so hard to keep them at bay, where something in him just sort of changes and he snaps and he gets this sort of look in his eyes, his body language changes into something like so threatening and alarming. He kind of locks onto his prey, like nothing is going to stop him or get in between him and what he wants. So in these moments it is kind of terrifying, but I also find it quite sad in a way, because in these moments and towards the end of the episode we see him lose a lot of hope. We see him kind of resign himself to his fate, for lack of a better phrase. He's like, well, I tried to change, I can't, this is me, this is who I am, this is just genes and my DNA, I can't help it, and essentially just sort of gives up on himself, and yeah, it ends up being to his detriment, which is another aspect to this sort of mindset we can find ourselves in, which is, well, I keep trying, but this thing always seems to get the better of me somehow, and other people react in a negative way to me when I'm stripped down and vulnerable and honest about this thing, and it can feel like a never ending thing, and you can sometimes ask yourself, why even change, why even bother? Another part of this as well is his interactions with different people, especially with Mulder. There's this, again, if you're unfamiliar, there's this kind of formula that plays out during the duration of most episodes, which is something strange will happen at the beginning of the episode. We, as the audience, as the viewer, are obviously privy to these events, this information. And then, Mulder and Scully that get called out onto the scene. Within 10 minutes into the episode, Mulder will clock what's going on. He'll come out with this big outlandish theory to Scully, which of course as the audience we understand and we know to be more or less true. But obviously Scully isn't privy to the things that we have seen. So she'll dismiss this, and then as the episode goes on, more strange things will happen. And Scully, although she's still skeptic, she slowly comes around to this outlandish idea that Mulder has been saying this whole entire time. So in the episode, I think I remember Scully is more or less convinced that the person committing these crimes is one of Rob's co-workers. I can't remember his name, but he's, an ex-con. He has a bad attitude, not a really nice guy. And Scully is like, well, it's obviously him. While Mulder doesn't believe this, and for some reason he's like locked onto Rob, and he's like, I'm sure there's more to do with this. And I think Mulder in this episode, if we're looking at it from this angle and this idea that it is through Rob's perspective, it almost is representative of that one person or that one trigger or thought that just won't leave you alone. And while you're out here like, I'm trying, you don't understand, I want to be a good person, like I want to make good decisions for myself, or I don't want to feel that way, there's that one thing. And it could be an actual human that's just rude and unsupportive, or it could be a certain type of trigger or negative type of thought that just keeps coming up in your head and like making you feel like shit. and like you've done something wrong, and even though you try really hard to change, you just can't be forgiven either by yourself or others for your past mistakes, because someone or something just won't let it lie. Because yeah, in the episode, Mulder is just always there, you know. Whenever Rob is like, think he's out of the clear or think he's out of the woods and thinks he can just like go back to his normal life and hang in there for a bit more, Mulder is just always there with like his little smirk, like digging around, asking a few more questions, bringing stuff up that Rob doesn't want to think about. And it's just, yeah, it's that trigger, it's that person, it's that thought that just keeps coming in to make us feel guilty. I think it's also interesting to me, he uses a lot of outside external things to help him and make him feel better. But when he starts looking internally is when it all kind of starts to fall apart, which I guess is what tends to happen in real life, or at least what we might first perceive to be as falling apart. He does a lot of self-help tapes. From what we can gather, he does this a lot as kind of like his routine, but they don't really seem to work. However, when he gets a chance to go to therapy, at first it seems really like it's really helping him. He is a really kind, patient therapist who genuinely wants to help him. But as it's sort of working and he's sort of opening up, he gets really uncomfortable and he walks away and he claims he doesn't need it or it's not working. Same with Mulder, you know, this external force starts to notice him and the things that he's doing that, you know, he's been really good at hiding from so far. And, you know, Rob gets really irritated and stressed and his cravings start to get even worse. From a surface level interpretation, of course, Rob is going to get irritated with all of these people asking questions, right? Because they're going to implicate him in the crimes he has been committing. And yes, he is going to be feeling the pressure with an FBI agent constantly sniffing around while investigating the crimes that he has 100% committed. But if we, again, were to look at this from my deeper, more woo-woo interpretation, then I would say it represents what it feels like to kind of go through your life kind of struggling and getting by but not really dealing with it for whatever reason, kind of stuck in like survival mode, coping mechanisms, stuff like that, which is not bad, by the way. I've been there, like it gets you through. I'm not shaming anyone for that. But then, you know, you suddenly get triggered by something, or, you know, you either by choice or by force, you look inwards and you start to try and face the problem head on, because I think everything starts internally. So perhaps, you know, you're going to therapy, or someone in your life has suddenly noticed something's a bit off and they might try and, like, you know, bring it up and support you, or maybe one day you just kind of notice it yourself on a little bit of a deeper level. And while you're acknowledging this stuff, and it's great for a bit, and, you know, maybe you're experiencing breakthroughs and, you know, things are making a bit more sense and you're being honest with yourself, maybe then you get to be a bit scared and you get a bit triggered, or you get a bit uncomfortable because it's new and it's honest and it's not just coping, it's like actually looking at the problem head on. And by this feeling of being seen and this feeling of like someone else knowing, or even just acknowledging it yourself, can be a bit overwhelming. It can be very scary. It can be very, you know, a lot of emotions, a lot of things can come up. It can be confusing, and, you know, embarrassment and shame can come up. You're maybe doubting that you can ever get yourself out of this. You're maybe annoyed because you're thinking, well, I was going about life the way that it was. Why did this have to happen? Just, you know, all these new thoughts and feelings of vulnerability are coming up. So yeah, of course you might be tempted to go back to how it was, to hide away from this new way. Your coping mechanisms or your cravings might be even stronger than ever. The urge to go back and forget or quickly make yourself feel better, like, it may be very easy to doubt yourself and think that you're not capable of overcoming this, and maybe you've been working at this for a long time, like Rob seemingly was, and yet you still have the same urges. So the more you look at yourself, the more you get frustrated, even though you've been making progress. All you might see is all of the times you failed, even if all of those were long ago in the past. I think what I'm trying to say, and what this whole video of me ranting and taking this episode way too seriously has been about, is that sometimes we go through things that make us feel like we're not normal, and like we're not human, and like we can't help ourselves for in the moment there, or like we're not worthy of help, and like everyone around us is judging us, and maybe we think that they're seeing us as this strange monster that is beyond help, but in reality We are all just human, and everyone struggles with different things, but we all struggle. And we deserve to love ourselves and get help and stick to it, even if it feels difficult or impossible or like we can't do it. And just because we've made mistakes in the past, or just because we've had hiccups or bumps in the road, it doesn't mean we're an awful person who can never change. Obviously, I am just talking about addictions and coping mechanisms and stuff. Like, I'm not actually talking about brain eating monsters. Please don't harm people. Please don't eat people's brains. That's actually bad. I just find it so fascinating what different pieces of media can bring up for different people and at different stages of your life. I do struggle with my mental health sometimes, and I am quite a visual thinker and learner, so I do use media a lot, especially the horror genre, without even meaning to kind of make sense of things and my experiences and what I deal with or have dealt with, and how I can maybe learn and grow or live with it or just make sense of it, really. I think a lot of the time my mind is a beautiful place, but it can also be a very overwhelming, confusing place, and it's so helpful to just watch a film or watch a TV show randomly, and suddenly I'll be watching this and I'll just suddenly think, oh my gosh, this reminds me of what I'm going through, or this reminds me of what I went through years ago, and oh wow, now I can relate that to that, and that's kind of like that, and that kind of mirrors that, and that's a metaphor for that, and I don't know, it just can make sense of it a little bit more, and it doesn't seem so scary, because I feel like, and not everyone needs to have a justification, or not everything needs to be justified, and not everything needs to be explained away, but for me personally, it is very helpful to kind of understand a little bit more of my mind and my psyche, and why I do the things I do, or why I believe certain things, why I act a certain way, and indeed what scares me and why it scares me. I think maybe someone just needed to hear that you're not a monster and you're not a bad person, and there is hope. And just because you are struggling with this thing or multiple things, it doesn't mean that that is your whole identity, because you are so much more than just that, and you deserve to see yourself as more than just that. Don't let the dark in you overshadow the light, because actually we all have light in us and we all have dark in us, and it's about learning to walk with and accept and love both and work with both. Actually, both sides of us have a lot of wisdom, and the things we shy away from can oftentimes be the most healing when we actually take a look at them in a way that is loving and gentle. That was a lot from one episode. I probably read a lot into that I didn't need to, but you know what, it was on my mind, and I truly do believe that hopefully someone will find this when they need to. And yeah, we're not monsters, we're just humans that struggle sometimes, and that's okay. There should be a course, like an X-Files course, like a degree or something. I know there's like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer degree or something in America. You can do like a Buffy course, which is amazing, and I love that. But I feel like there needs to be an X-Files one too, right? Like, I feel like every episode, even like the really silly, stupid ones, I feel like I could write like a 10-page essay on every episode ever. Anyway, I've been yapping for far too long. I feel like this one has definitely been a long one. I've been trying to make my videos like 15 minutes now, but I feel like this is me just like banging on for half an hour about like a brain-eating monster. Who'd have thought? Anyway, I will let you go now, and I will talk to you very soon.